Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. It is Monday, June 28th, 2021, and my name is Dr. Brad Reedy. For those of you that might be new to Evoke or new to this format, this is for family members and any family members, including siblings, extended family, even close family friends who want to ask questions about our process at Evoke or want to ask questions about therapy, self-help, anything related to what we do at Evoke Therapy Programs, both our wilderness program and also our intensive program. So submit questions. If you're a live audience member, you can submit questions at any time, and I will address those in the order they're received. Malia, who is moderating for me this evening, she will collect the questions and pass them on to me anonymously. So let's start with the first question. Can you talk a bit about the transition from Evoke to a therapeutic boarding school? I'm worried about the change in tone and approach. That's a great question. In fact, more often than not, we hear people talk about the difficulty in this transition from Evoke, which is a very small box, so to speak, which has negative connotations to it being a small box, but really it's about having enough support, right? Enough support that clinically you're not going to fall through the cracks. You're not going to fall. Um, you're not going to hurt yourself. You're not going to get yourself into trouble. You're going to be able to be supported along the way. When you move to that bigger box with more choices, with more variables, with more people, more staff coming in and going out, perhaps more contact with your family in some ways, or at least more exchange or interaction between the child and the outside community, you're going to be stressed and changed. It's a step down. It's more like real life, right? Where you don't always have the opportunity to stop at any given moment and engage in a therapeutic process. But in that way, it's meant to help you kind of adjust and make that transition back to typical life. It's not as fast paced. You're likely to get letters from your children at a therapeutic boarding school or some other option after Evoke, unless it's home. You're likely to get letters saying this isn't the right place for me. This isn't the right people. I can do this at home. So those are typical letters that you'll receive, which is, I think, a part of the growing process for everybody involved. You're less insulated. That's one thing I will tell you. You're less insulated from the day-to-day ups and downs in a wilderness program than you are at a therapeutic boarding school or treatment program. In other words, you're more likely to get mundane, everyday news. It's going to be less of a steep growth curve. So I think your concerns, I'm kind of telling you, your concerns are very valid. I think for me, it's about adjusting your expectations, understanding that the challenge of all the differences is a part of the process, that it's more like life. I remember years ago when I was running Ironman triathlons and marathons, one of my training partners said to me a couple weeks or a few weeks prior to one of the Ironman races that I was going to run, he said, "This is the best I've ever felt at this point in the race." And I was shocked by his calling our training part of the race, but it really is, right? That the journey is a part of the process. Um, so Tuesday mornings in the rain at the local high school track aren't that exciting. Race day, that's really exciting and really easy to focus on. But that Tuesday morning when there's a freezing cold rain outside and you're tired because you stayed up late the night before, that's really the race right then. It's hard to stay motivated on that Tuesday morning. And I think settings after Evoke are like that. We have a lot of supervision. You're insulated from your child's ups and downs. You're getting that weekly letter, that weekly contact, but it's all being put into a frame that's digestible for you. And with a therapeutic boarding school, you're likely to feel the bumps and the bruises and the potholes in the road on the journey, so to speak. So that's the challenge. Is it's less exciting, right? It's less dynamic, and I think that creates the different tone that you're talking about and the challenge that you're talking about. So it's a great question, and I think it's about preparing expectations as much as anything else. Somebody asked this question. This question is in regards to sharing feelings of disappointment with kids. I just finished To Change a Mind, and Dr. McKinnon, the author of the book, talks about an effective method for urging maturation in teens as being the child knowing that poor choices will cause a negative emotion in the parent, which caused a bit of confusion in my Evoke trained brain. At one point, the example he uses is, quote, "You'll upset and disappoint me if you let me down." He also says, as a potential response, hurting another person's feelings is so unkind. The worst of it, I think, would be that I'd be ashamed of you. My understanding is that your recommended method is to share very little by way of feelings with our kids, almost nothing at all, because of the difficulty they have containing it and not taking responsibility for parents' well-being. What are your thoughts on Dr. McKinnon's examples, and do you see the benefit to the child feeling the weight of parental distancing or disappointment? Wow. I like Dr. McKinnon. I know him, and I know of his book. I've never read it. And I'll say this as plainly as I can. I think he is 180 degrees wrong in what you're recapping here. And I think that virtually everybody in treatment who knows what they're doing would agree with me that children have to become themselves, and that the compromise or the sacrifice that children impose upon themselves to take care of their parents is, in many cases, what they're medicating. So no, I don't think that children are responsible for carrying our burdens. I mean, it's actually, when we talk about it logically, simply, it doesn't make any sense. Hurting somebody's feelings is not unkind. I can think of thousands of examples, right? An infinite number of examples where hurting somebody's feelings would be the right thing to do. Imagine your daughter, could be your son, leaving an abusive relationship, but it's hurting her spouse's feelings. Imagine saying no to somebody in an area where you felt principled. Imagine saying no to your children and hurting their feelings. Are you being unkind if you have a boundary? So no, I'm surprised to hear that, and I'm glad that your Evoke trained brain, which is really just, you really just understand developmentally how a child grows up. But no, saddling children with our emotions and making them responsible for our choices doesn't make any sense. It's the best way to contribute to a lack of self in a child, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is foster a self. And then they have the right to blame you for all of their feelings too, and to tell you you're being unkind and cruel, and don't you know the effect that you're having on them? So I could talk about this for days and hours, but I've already written 2 books about it and broadcast 1,400 hours of episodes on it. It's absolutely untrue. And I don't think that many people that study child development would disagree with me. Lay people would agree with Dr. McKinnon. That's a lay person's idea. That's why I'm surprised, because I respect Dr. McKinnon as a person. But no, that couldn't be farther from what's ideal for children and their development. I'm actually trying to contain myself right now because it's an example of one of the things that I think so many people parents are taught, and it's easy to sell that to them because it reinforces their own ideas. But we all know we're trying to, you go to Al-Anon and they tell you what other people think about you is none of your business. That one of the main premises in Al-Anon is that you're responsible for your serenity, that I'm responsible for my serenity. And that there's so much out there today that to sacrifice belonging or to seek for belonging and acceptance when it comes at the cost of your own personal truth and true feelings doesn't make any sense. Yes, our children are symptomatic. And yes, because we love our children when they put themselves in harm's way, emotionally, psychologically, or physically, because of their symptoms, yes, it's going to affect us. But to tell them that, to lay that on their shoulders, to make them get better so we'll feel better, right? To make them improve so that we can sleep at night, that is a reversal of what we think of when we think of parents raising children. We don't want your children to grow up thinking that they're responsible for everybody's feelings. Just imagine how susceptible that makes them to toxic and abusive relationships, peer relationships, or couple relationships. Again, the examples could go on and on and on. I'll just stop there. And thank you for asking it. Somebody writes, we will be receiving guidelines or guidance on how we get back on how we transition our son back to our household without him going back to bad behaviors and asking for the computer constantly. For example, guidance on keeping him on the same schedule as Wilderness, getting up early, exercising, doing chores, etc., to temper his technology addiction. Are we given a written list of coping skills that worked for our son? So we can remind him how to implement them at home? I think that's something that you can ask for sure. But let me twist this a little bit, because I think your question kind of invites this perspective shift. I say the same thing to your children about you. I'll preface it with that. But what I like to say to parents is, assume that your children aren't going to change, right? Assume that they're going to still push the limits, challenge you, ask for computer time, be tempted to go back in those old patterns. And the reason I say prepare for them not to have changed, because it redirects your focus on where our focus needs to be for us to be effective at our job, which is our boundaries. Now, do your children change? Yes. Do they develop coping skills? Yes. But so much of it is because we have boundaries in our program and we're not emotionally invested ideally, in them changing, if that makes sense. In other words, I have my boundaries. You can choose what you have to do with it. But so you can ask for those things from the therapist. You can ask for those things from your child. But there's something in the question that speaks to the part of me that says wanting it to be easy is a setup for failure. I have the utmost confidence in our process with your children in the wilderness, but I tell them the same thing that I'm telling you right now. In fact, I'm going out to Bend, Oregon tomorrow and the next day to visit the groups, and I'll tell the students this on more than one occasion, I'm sure, as I always do, which is I say to them, plan on your parents not changing. And then I tell them the reason that I say that to you is so that you can focus on what's within your control instead of focusing on how to challenge or manipulate your parents, how to get them to change. So in recovery, right, as we all get healthier, we focus on what we can change, which is us, our responses. And I'll tell you that when we make that shift in our focus, the things around us tend to improve dramatically, right? Exponentially. But if we focus on changing and pushing all the right buttons in everybody else so they'll do what we want, then our environment tends to stay the same, tends to not shift, and patterns get entrenched. And so all of those things you're asking for can be asked of your therapist and of your child, even better, but you're going to still be put to the test, right? Even in some of the best case scenarios, you're going to be put to the test. The child developmentally is just had a re-experiencing of themselves in a new context. And when they're back home, wherever they come from, that old context is going to cause regression for you and for them. So focus on what you can change, focus on your coping, focus on your relapse prevention, focus on your work, and then watch how they shift. We shift the project. In Evoke's way of thinking, we shift the project from fixing the child to fixing us. We fix the focus from working on the child's mental health to working on our mental health. And if you go to one of the 12-step programs that we suggest, Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, AdultChildren.org, if you go to one of those programs, you'll hear all of this. right? These are support groups created for people who have somebody in their life that is unhealthy, addictive, self-sabotaging, struggling with mental health issues, all of those kinds of issues. And you won't hear instruction then about how to manage the other person. You'll hear stories and insight about what's my work in this? What can I do differently in part of this? And that's part of what you're asking, right? You're asking for tools and skills. So at any rate, I hope that's helpful. Somebody writes, does the wilderness therapy approach sometimes not work? If so, what are the factors that contribute to that? What happens if the wilderness stay isn't long enough? Does the child end up pretty much staying at the same place? And how does the therapist know that the child is cooked and ready for discharge? I know this might seem far-reaching to say, but if I have time to have this conversation with somebody, which I do right now, at least in my response, I always say it always works because it's at least an assessment, diagnostic assessment. And that's something that we have control over. It oftentimes is a therapeutic accelerator or springboard to new levels of growth and awareness in the child and in the family. And maybe most important, if you do your work, like if you're attending this broadcast or listening to this podcast, and you're doing your work and you're reading the books and the assignments, it changes you. The secret to all of this, you guys, the secret to all of this is the shift in focus from them being the project to you being the project. And so if you do your work, it always works. It always works. It sets a new baseline. It creates a bridge. There are times that children make less progress than others in the therapeutic process. But that's why I point out that there are several goals that wilderness therapy accomplishes. One of them being the therapeutic progress of the child, but the progress of the parents, the shift in perspective on the parents' part, the shift in locus of control, which is from outside locus of control or external locus of control, which means what happens to me determines my peace and serenity, happiness in life, to how I deal with it determines my happiness, peace, and serenity in life. And that's the research shows that children overall make great improvements in that area in our program. But that's your job too, right? See, I have 4 children. I'm a dad of 4. And they don't always do what I want. They don't make it easy for me. But that's my work. I have people all around me, professionally and personally, that won't change and that won't improve. And if my success or happiness or serenity was based on that, I'd be doomed. Right? I'd be at the mercy of my environment. In essence, I would be living in what people sometimes revert to as the victim mentality. So we parents have to get out of the victim mentality. We have to stop believing or even trying to approach the idea that you're only as happy as your least happy child. We have to realize the insanity of that statement. We have to find our own serenity and bring that to our marriages and bring that to our parenting, right? So, good question. Somebody says, I'm doing a field visit next week. I listened to the 4 R's webinar, but I still don't understand what exactly I'm supposed to do with this assignment that I'm supposed to bring into the field with me. The 4 R's assignment is simply just creating a feeling statement around resentment that you have toward your child, regret that you have toward your child, respect, something you admire about them, regret, respect, resent, request, and a request that you have for your child. It's just a simple tool to get the discussion going. I don't use it myself when I do my sessions usually, because we get to all of those 4 R's. But if it's helpful for you to, it's kind of a facilitating tool to get the discussion going. Because oftentimes you can be so overwhelmed and so flooded with what's the intention or the goal that it's hard to stay present in the activities, in the therapy, and talking to your child. So it's just a tool that you might bring with you. Just write a couple of notes. You could do it on a 2 3x5 cards, writing some notes that remind you of it. It also gives you practice at the I feel statement, which is a tool that we use in part to connect to other people and communicate with other people. But really, the I feel statement is a tool that helps us identify what's going on inside of here, inside of us, right? I feel this way when this happens. I feel this way because I think, and what I hope that's inside of my control is X, and what I hope that's outside of my control is Y, right? That's the process, is we're starting to become aware of ourselves. And it demonstrates ownership. That's why, just like the first question of the evening, I don't encourage people to make their children responsible for their feelings. But if you're capable of saying, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling triggered, I'm feeling upset, and then you either say or imply, but that's mine to deal with. I'm telling you so you know what's going on with me, but I'm going to take responsible for my feelings. Isn't that what we want our children to do? To take responsibility and own their feelings and own their responses to their feelings? If that's what we want for them, and I would assume all of you listening want that for your children, wouldn't that be worth modeling? Doesn't that idea, don't those principles also apply to us if they apply to them? So the 4 hours is just a tool to get you talking. If your therapist assigns it to you, great. If they don't assign it to you, those things will come up in the course of your therapy anyway. Somebody writes, do most kids tend to start wilderness therapy thinking it's punitive? And how do they feel by the time that they leave? I think a lot of them think in terms of punishment, and think of it as on that simple of a level as punishment, sometimes punitive. But you know, the key to helping them move through those feelings is to not be attached to how they think and feel about it. Say, I get it. From your perspective, it makes sense. Given your background, it makes sense how you feel. And I'm here for it. And I'll listen. I don't talk them out of it. I don't give them a look on the bright side speech. Children typically move from resentment and anger to resignation to acceptance, and many of them get to investment. I would say in my anecdotal experiences that about 75% of the clients leave saying something like, I might come back here and work here. I might like to do this for myself. So that's my experience. Not all of those 75% do it. But when we've taken a poll at any given time, about 25% of our field guides, our frontline staff that work with the children, are former students. We've also had former students become therapists on more than one occasion at Evoke. So the way that we help people move through feelings is by letting them feel, by letting them kind of work their way through it. And I think most of us have the instinct that we want to push our children to get them to that end point or that last stage. That's what most of us feel like, but it doesn't really serve us to do that. It works at cross purposes for us, trying to get children. Let them be angry, let them be sad, let them be hurt. Even if you feel comfortable saying, I'm sorry, maybe I was wrong. It's my best guess, but I don't know how to do this. And I doubt myself sometimes. When parents can approach it with that tone and sensibility, kids have nothing to push against. But part of what they're pushing against when they stay stuck in their anger and resentment is the power struggle about who's right. But our shift, and I talk about this a lot. In fact, I just wrote a post about this on our social media today. Our shift is in this work, you don't get to be right anymore, but you do get to be a self. That is who you are. And being a self is so much better than being right. So our contribution to children staying stuck in their resentment or their negative idea is that we push against it. And our contribution to helping them move through it is to allow them to feel and think what they want to feel and think. Becoming unattached to whether or not they're grateful, they see the wisdom in it, they've forgiven us, they see the value in it, or they think we did it because we're trying to humiliate or punish or be punitive to them. Somebody writes, what does wellness therapy for an adoption-related attachment issues look like? How does therapy aid in teaching teens the skills needed to develop healthy, trusting relationships, especially when they're in wilderness, which by nature is relatively short-term? It's a great question. First of all, I and we at Evoke, we see all issues through an attachment lens. And everybody has some kind of attachment trauma, which is basically a way of saying we all come from imperfect parents. Less than optimal all of the time. And somebody just asked me this the other day when I was doing an intensive and running some consultations. If you're only with somebody for a short period of time, what difference can you make? And my answer is you can sow the seeds of doubt in them by giving them a different experience. The example that I use, and I know it's just a story and I know it's just a musical, but if you've seen the movie or the musical Les Mis, you'll remember the story when Jean Valjean steals the silver from the bishop, knocks him out, and the cops bring him back. And the police say, we found this man with your silver. And the bishop, of course, says, you left the most expensive part. You were a fool and you left the most expensive part. And then the police, of course, are embarrassed and they leave. And the bishop says, just go and just pay it forward. Just go and give love back to the world. And that's just a symbolic moment. But that's what it's like to sit across from an empathic, capable other. I read and reposted something today on my social media. And it says this. I'll read it to you. This is how fresh this is. Somebody wrote, if your child lets you know that you've hurt them, please thank them for telling you. If they're giving you this feedback, it typically means that they trust you with their pain, which is extremely brave and vulnerable. Your response can either reinforce this trust or weaken it. So when you have an experience where a capable adult is able to say they're sorry, is able to kind of lose in the power struggle, to be wrong, to be human, to be fallible. If you grew up in a home where parents needed to be the good ones or the right ones with always the best of intentions, and every one of your feelings was explained away by the intentions on the parents' part, if you give a more capable response as a staff member or a therapist, or even a parent, even better yet, a parent, they start to doubt that who they are is broken and sick. And they start to realize that, oh my gosh, I just haven't been around people that knew what it meant to be a capable container, right? Capable of holding space for me. The better I get at this in my personal and professional life, the better I get at saying I'm sorry and I don't know. The more stressed I am, the more overwhelmed I am, the more triggered I am, I will give you lectures about me being right and good. And I'll do it well because I'm trained in this stuff. So when I'm doing well, I can be comfortable in my not knowing imperfect place. When I'm not doing well, I am right and you are wrong. And even therapists do this to their clients. I was teaching that this week with the intensive I was running, that, you know, therapists are experts when you tell them that you're upset with them or that they hurt you or that you didn't like what they did. They're experts at making you think it's your fault, that something's wrong in you. But if the therapist is a capable therapist, they will say to you, thank you for telling me. And I'll tell you something. That's how I learned this, right? That's having that experience sitting across from my wonderful, amazing therapist for now over 2 decades. Now I know what an adult sounds like, a healthy adult sounds like. And I can kind of compare that. Just a month ago, I had to tell her again, after 22 years, that I didn't like the previous week's therapy, that I was hurt and bothered by it. And I was, even after all of these years, after practicing and essentially learning this from her, I told her I was nervous. And she said, why are you nervous? And I said, because what if you fail at it this time? I would have nobody to talk to, nowhere to go. And of course, without great effort, she was able to ask questions and learn how she had hurt me or bothered me the week before, apologize, and thanked me. I think one of my favorite broadcasts on this topic, Malia, maybe you can look it up, but challenging the notions of what it means to be a good parent is a great illustration, instruction in what this question is speaking to. Somebody writes, please offer guidance for new parents who are struggling with what to write to their young adult who is insisting wilderness is more than they needed, that they are ready to come home, and that we are not listening to them, that we are not understanding them when they say they want to leave. We are doing our best to reflect back their feelings and distinguish between hearing her versus following through with her requests. I think less is more. And that's kind of what I've been talking about, just saying I'm sorry and I'm glad that you're talking about it. And again, thinking of the major premise of the program, shifting from being right to being you, it's just about your boundary. See, it's like when I had a father ask me, and I wrote about this in my first book, when a father said to me, do you have any research on the effects of marijuana on the brain? The young adult brain, he asked. And I said, I could get my hands on some for sure, but why you ask? And he said, because my young adult son is living in the basement, smoking pot and playing video games, and I don't want him to do it. And I said, well, why don't you just tell him you're not okay with it? And the father said to me, that's good enough. And I heard it, right? I heard the wound. That father, like most of us, grew up in a home where it was about who was right and who was wrong, not feelings. Boundaries aren't I am right. Boundaries are this is what I'm comfortable with. Boundaries aren't you're being inappropriate. Boundaries are I'm not okay with that behavior being talked to that way. Boundaries are I'm not ready for you to come home. Not presenting a case where I have to get you to think that it's the right thing. So it's nuanced and subtle. And frankly, it takes years to kind of generate this information for yourself. But it just does sound like listening and validating. And really, it sounds like your young adult daughter is trying to get back into an old dance with you. Get back into the old debate, the old discussion, the old dance of who's right. Instead of just saying, I'm just not ready yet to support that. If it's a young adult and if it's an adolescent, I'm just not ready for that. And I get it that you're mad. And I get it. And I'm glad you're telling me. And I'll try to keep listening. I'll try to keep growing. And, I like to tell parents that it's okay to express the sentiment. You can choose the words, but you're working as fast as you can at home to be ready for them to come home. None of this is ideal. None of this is what we hoped for, what we were looking for. We didn't have children with the hope that we would have to send them away because they're struggling with mental health and addiction issues, either adolescent or young adult children. But this is where we are, and we're doing our best, and we're all learning as we go. And that's a much better, much more effective psychological approach to it than trying to have the debate about how long is the right amount, how short, when is the exact moment when your child has met the threshold. Thanks for posting the podcast link, Malia. Somebody writes, any advice for when we say goodbye after the field visit? We are Canadian, so we won't be participating in the transfer to school. I'm already anxious about the goodbye for our upcoming visit. I remember visiting my son in the wilderness and saying goodbye. I also remember, because I am in the States, and dropping him off at the new school after Evoke. I will tell you, it's just going to be painful. For me, those are some of the hardest moments. I think they're even harder for most parents than the initial send away. But you just feel it. You just lean into the feeling. Try to be as honest with your emotion as possible. I think there's something powerful when a child experiences your heartfelt longing to have them home, but you're still making the decision not to bring them home. I think that's a powerful juxtaposition for them, to see your humanness. One of the most painful moments that I experienced with my first child was leaving him at the therapeutic school, and he wasn't trying to talk me out of it. There were no dramatics. In fact, if there had been, it probably would have been easier for me because I would have seen it. But it's like a staff member said to me years ago when it was raining in October and I wanted to do sessions in my car. And he said to me, I said to him, I'll give you 5 minutes to talk me out of having sessions in my car because I'm miserable. We couldn't get a fire, just kept smoking because it was raining. I was in my sleeping bag. The kids were in their sleeping bags. So we're doing sessions in sleeping bags inside of a tent with me, the student, and the staff. And the staff didn't need 5 minutes. His name was Steven. And Steven just said to me, Brad, just show them how to suffer. Show them how to deal with feelings. And that's all he needed, was one sentence. And I thought, I can do that for them. I can show them that I'm capable of feeling and still maintaining my conviction for my principles, but feeling a great sadness. And the two don't rob anything from each other. It's going to be hard, though. Somebody writes, what I'm reading and hearing through Evoke is to accept our children as they are. Their choices, no matter how bad we think they are theirs to experience, and their consequences are their learning opportunities. What then is the role of the parents as a teacher? Is nature assumed to be more powerful and influential than nurture? Can you speak to best practices in convincing a child to attend versus using a transport service? My fear is that we'll be unable to get him there ourselves, but the transport seems potentially traumatic since it completely takes away from independence. It's ironic since appropriate independence is the very thing we are trying to build. I think this came into our email in between. I said this literally to my two younger children, 13 and 19, last night. I said, I'm essentially done teaching you for the most part. You don't want to listen to my lectures. You probably never did, but I don't think our role is to teach as much as it is to show. I don't mean just set a good example. I mean, show them how to be a human. And having boundaries, not letting my child run out into the street is not taking away their autonomy per se. It's preserving their life, right? There's a priority. I don't want my children to learn the hard way that if you run out in front of traffic, you don't survive. Right? That's so finding that line is personal. It's okay. You know, the irony is, uh, I wouldn't need to transport any of my children, but that's because they all know that I would be willing to. The betrayal that they feel with transport oftentimes is that the boundary of a transport is so dramatically contrasted with everything that's ever happened in their life that it is in therapy we call it a therapeutic betrayal. In other words, a healthy betrayal, a healthy changing of the rules. My oldest son, he went to Wilderness. We didn't really have to transport him because we weren't negotiating. There was no question. There was no leverage. There was no blackmail. There was nothing. If he started running away, if we told him, I would have said, okay, let me know when you're ready to come home. I mean, transporting is not traumatic inherently. I know that it can be alarming and shocking for some kids, but I don't find it to be punitive. I don't find it to be an unhealthy betrayal. I think it's just saying to the child, to the adolescent child, where the shift in boundaries is starting now, like right now. And if I had confidence that we could get you to a program safely, I wouldn't transport you. But I don't have confidence in us, and partly in you and partly in myself and mostly in all of us put together. So this is the way that we're going to do it. So the way that you get your children to go without being transported is you let them know that you would transport them if you had to. And if they know that, there's no debate. The threats, the manipulation, the pushback, that's all because that dance has been established for a long time now. So those are my thoughts. They get to feel betrayed, by the way. They get to feel resentful. They get to feel angry. The fact of the matter is, every parent needs to improve. Every parent has room for improvement. And there's plenty of things for you to say you're sorry about. That's what children need in their lives more often, is authority figures not being autocratic, dictatorial, and being able to say they're sorry and modeling vulnerability and modeling accountability. That's the teaching. But our lectures, the great wisdom that gets passed from a parent to a child isn't so much in what you say, it's in your ability to hear. That's how wisdom gets transferred. So I don't teach a lot to my children, but my children would have no doubt about my basic values and boundaries and what I believe. One of my children was picked up for shoplifting, and when they came home, I said, "How are you doing?" And then I said to them, they were a teenager at the time, I said, "I can't stop you from shoplifting. You can keep doing this if you want. There's going to be one simple natural consequence, which is I'm going to have a discussion with the other kids' parents who were involved, and I'm sorry if that feels intrusive or violating or humiliating, but I feel that that's the right thing for me to do. That's my boundary. But you're not grounded. I'm not going to bar you from seeing your friends. And you know where this leads. It's up to you." And I consider that one of my highlights as a father, as a parent. And then the irony of it was, my wife and I and my adult child and her partner later on in the evening were in the living room talking about when we had shoplifted as kids. And we all survived, and all four of us were therapists trying to help families and children. Children learn from us what they're going to learn from us, and our lectures are not the most important source of the transfer of wisdom. Somebody writes, is a residential treatment school more of a lockdown facility, or a therapeutic boarding school allows for more freedoms? I think our son is hoping for the latter, but given his history of substance abuse, it is more likely to be sent to the former. I'm picturing jail. Please tell me this is not accurate. It's not accurate. It's meant to be healing, and jail is not. We're trying to get therapy into jail, right? Like we're trying to help the correctional system in our country see that is a recipe for trauma and a recipe for more crime. In general, your assumption is correct, but I will tell you this: the appropriate level of care for your child is going to be the best level of care, and their desire for one or the other is understandable, but not necessarily an indication of what's best for them. To put them in the wrong setting because it's what they prefer isn't necessarily the right thing to do. So it's a process you have to work out in dialogue. You can ask your child what they want. You can ask them what they're hoping for. That will be in essence, that'll be somewhat diagnostic with how insightful they are. But all programs want to offer children as much freedom and privilege and autonomy as they can within the structure, because that's the goal, is to get back home. We're all better off if we can get your children home as soon as possible. You see? We become a much more appealing service if we get your family back together and healthy sooner. The length of time that is often recommended for your child to be away isn't a money grab, or isn't some kind of logical deficit in the treatment world. We're trying to get them home as soon as possible. If we could finish wilderness therapy in a week, in a day, we would do it. And everybody would send their kid, right? It would be the best business model in the world would be to have effective, very, very, very short-term treatment. So you kind of work your way through the process. Work with professionals that you trust. Have difficult conversations. Be honest. Don't be a good client. Be an honest client. And work through this process, because it's not going to be easier at home, even if your child's a young adult. After treatment is not easier. And often, you maybe have heard this principle, but if somebody responds poorly to a boundary that you set, most of the time this is talked about in terms of couples, partners, spouses. But if somebody responds poorly to a boundary you set, it is more evidence that the boundary was necessary. And that same idea can apply to our children. What I have said is if they can deal with a no, which is a boundary, then they can deal with a yes. And if they can't deal with a no, they can't deal with a yes. Like I said, if my son had been trying to manipulate me when I was transporting him to the next program, dropping him off would have been much easier. Much, much easier. But he wasn't manipulative at all. He was accepting of it, understanding of it even. Maybe even a little bit excited in kind of a nervous way. And that made it all the more difficult. And I tell your children that all the time. Make your parents doubt the need for aftercare. Make your parents doubt the need for a transport. Make your parents doubt the need for a higher level of care by being healthier. Somebody writes, can you offer a perspective on situations where a young adult has been through multiple treatment scenarios and is still struggling? Our case is that our daughter started wilderness at 14, did a therapeutic boarding school, then adolescent transitional program from which she graduated high school, and now is a young adult, and now is in a young adult transitional program. She is treatment weary, and we are treatment weary, and also discouraged by seeing kind of a failure to launch. Our consultant is suggesting maybe she just needs to be out of a treatment setting to experience life, but we are concerned about the lack of executive function and failure to be consistent. Maybe we just have to take this as a marathon and focus on the positives. I know several parents are at the beginning of this journey, but if you could say something about longer term trajectories. Malia, I believe that I have a broadcast that is on multiple placements. I'm almost positive I did. I have one. So if you can pull up that link, that would be helpful. I was asked a question like this in a clinical meeting by our therapist a few years ago. And I said to the therapist the same thing I'm going to say to start off with you tonight, which is you have to find the story where it makes sense, right? And finding the story requires some intellectual flexibility and creativity. But the goal of therapists, in one sense, is to find a story where everything your child is doing makes sense. In other words, what is their mental health issue or issues? Why are they still struggling? And that's something we would do together, right? And it's not always good news. Thank you, Malia. Malia's just posted the link that I'm talking about. It's not always good news what we find out, right? You find out that your child may have a personality disorder or a diagnosis that's difficult to treat or takes a long time. Do your work. Go to your meetings. Get your support. I'm sorry it's a long process for you. I wish I had a simple answer. And sitting where I'm sitting right now, I really can't offer one. But yeah, I hear it. And find people that can sit with you so you don't have to be alone. We can't always solve everybody's problems, but we can sit lovingly with people in their unsolvable problems. I've had people that I've met at meetings and through the therapeutic journey who have lost spouses, who have lost children. Sometimes those losses are related to mental health issues. And I can't fix anything and I have no clever reframe for them. But what I can do is sit with them in their grief and their sadness and their powerlessness and offer them comfort. Looks like somebody asks the question, are these sessions ever captioned? My spouse is deaf. I don't know, Malia. Let's see if there's any kind of feature where they can come up with a transcript for all of this. I don't know. It's a fantastic and fair question. And then we'll get back to you on the next broadcast. All right, we'll do this for the last question. This is for the person who asked when the child will be cooked and ready. My personal experience is that you have to cook and ready yourself because our children are not under our control. Wonderful. Well, thank you for the questions and the feedback and the comments. Very, very helpful. Thank you for your old timers who come back and offer your strength and wisdom with experiences like that, questions like that, answers like that come from your experience. All right, a couple of things before we wrap up and I announce the next webinar. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. The Audacity to Be You is one that I read in my own voice. We have support groups for current and alumni parents of our wilderness programs. The next one will be this Thursday, July 1st at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We're also going to start having a rotation of alumni-only meetings. So that'll be announced soon. I'll announce that next time. If you're an intensive alumni, we also have another one coming up. We have those once a month. The next one is July 13th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information or to register. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, we have in-person intensives and also online intensives available to you. We have, I think there might be one spot. It might be full July 14th. And we also have August 11th through 15th. And then online, we still have space in our July 16th through 18th. So it's less expensive. You don't have to travel. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. I highly recommend intensive programming for anybody listening, parent of a child at Evoke or not. In my experience, this is the best thing you can do for for you and for the people that you love is to do a deep dive into your own work. And then we have a returning to you, which, so if you've been to a Finding You previously, then we have a returning to you in person in October 6th through 10th that I will be running. We have online virtual coaching for families, couples, individuals, young adults. So if you want coaching, you can contact Travis at evoketherapy.com to get a virtual coach. We also have pursuits programs. These are anywhere from 3 to 30 days adventure programs, think Therapy Light. We ask all current participants of Evoke to try at least 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, AdultChildren.org. RefugeRecovery.org is an alternative Buddhist-inspired support group. And then the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, all have classes and resources in your area free of cost. All of these broadcasts are available on your preferred podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast or go to SoundCloud.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us at Evoke Therapy using the handle at Evoke Therapy. Or on Instagram, you can also find at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. Also, my handle on all of my platforms is Dr. Brad Reedy. And then our Evoke Therapy blog has new information, new blogs each week. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. My next broadcast will be July 6th. That's next week. I'm going to be out in the field for the next couple of days in Bend, Oregon. 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time on July 6th, Tuesday. It is on mythology and therapy. What myth can teach us about our struggling children? So I'll be talking about several different myths, both current day myths, but also historical myths, to talk about some of the valuable take-home lessons I've learned about treating families and children by studying myths. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. For and on behalf of those that you love, thank you for doing your own work. Have a great evening. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.